Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Avi Havivi's weekly Siddur class.
In our series about working on your ideas about God as it influences your davening, we started talking about Hasidism, the Jewish renewal movement of the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, and 2000s, generally attributed to the beginnings of it to the Baal Shem Tov, who lived in the first part of the 18th century, and it really began to be started to expand later in the 18th century, late 1700s. Last week we talked about a core Hasidic idea of a goal is closeness to God, feeling close to God. And whereas we contrasted this with Maimonides' idea, not only Rambam, but others, that closeness to God is something one might achieve after long preparation, study, sophistication, etc., because God is pure intellect, and so we got to work to clarify or purify or something, develop our pure intellect so that we can apprehend God. For Hasidut, that's actually the starting point. It actually has nothing to do with intellect, and a feeling of intimacy or closeness with God is the optimal starting point for Hasidism, and something that anyone can experience. We'll talk in some subsequent weeks about techniques for doing this. Hasidim had various techniques for doing it. I also want to say that Hasidism taught that you can do this during your davening, but also not when you're davening. So Hasidism had a concept of being with God, not during davening time, but at other planned or spontaneous times. Their technical term for this was hitbodedut, which literally means alonification, right? It's for you to have alone time with God. And this was seen as generally not things that people do when they're at morning minyan, but things that people do on their own individually at other times of the day. So for Hasidism, this closeness to God was something that could be achieved during davening if you had certain, I'm going to call it mindfulness or consciousness during davening. We're going to see an example of that today, but also not during your davening, at your own individual times. And we all know, some stereotype about, Hasidic master out in the forest, that sort of thing. So that's kind of the little, stereotyped, but not entirely inaccurate version of hitbodedut, or alone time with God. We'll come back to hitbodedut in some future week. For the moment, we're going to focus on davening. So we talked last week about this closeness to God, which is called, what do we call it last week? Hitlahavut? Someone help me. Was it Hitlahavut? Now I'm going to have to look, because the word is escaping me. So give me a second, and then I will screen share. Hitlahavut, not Hitlahavut. Anyone feel free. Dveikut. Thank you. The word was eluding me. Thank you, Terry. Dveikut, which literally means stickiness or cleaving. It means trying to be attached to God, right? So Hasidic goal is dveikut or dveikus. If you, by the way, and you can look up, if you look on YouTube, for example, and you can look up, there are certain things called a dveikus nigun, which means a nigun or a melody to help you feel close to God, a dveikus nigun. So we talked about dveikut or dveikus last week, and this week we're going to talk about a different aspect of God and why, kind of the basis for why Hasidism thought it's possible to do to get close to God. All right, good. I'm ready. I got my thing ready. I'm going to do screen share in a second. By the way, first, I should ask, was there any question left over from last week before we move forward? Which you can also, hopefully, we'll make time to ask at the end of today. Okay. Screen share. And again, this text is attached to the class in the podcasts. Okay. So by the late 1800s, I'm going to unshare just for a word of history. By the late 1800s, there were, and certainly the late 1700s, late 18th century, and then early 1800s, there were multiple different Hasidic masters. This is, we might call this, historians call it the third generation of Hasidim. And each one of these masters had followers or disciples, their Hasidim, who would come either live in the town where that master was or visit them on some Shabbases and holidays to drink in their words of Torah. And different Hasidic masters might have a somewhat different approach. They were known, you'd attach yourself to a particular master who is called the Tzaddik, the righteous one. You would attach yourself to a particular Hasidic Tzaddik because you were a follower of their approach, and some of them did more singing, and some of them did more intellect, and some of them had different ideas. So, and then the tzaddik was succeeded by the next tzaddik, who is very often their son. These systems were very often dynastic, not always father-son, but very commonly. And the name of that Hasidic dynasty would have to do with the town where the original tzaddik was from. So there were the Rizhiner Hasidim and the Bratslaver Hasidim and this town Hasidim and that town Hasidim. And the Satmar Hasidim, et cetera, et cetera. So we have one group called the Lubavitch Hasidim, because their founder was in the town of Lubavitch. Okay, this is what has come to be called today Chabad, although Chabad and Lubavitch Hasidim are pretty much, they're the same thing, they're synonyms. I think the most recent Rebbe who died, who was believed by some to have been the Messiah and was not replaced, I think he was the 6th Lubavitch Rebbe, or maybe the 7th. Anyone can correct me. That's an easy Wikipedia one. Menachem Mendel Schneerson Zal. So the first Rebbe he's called the first Rebbe of Lubavitch, or within Lubavitch they called him the Alter Rebbe, the old Rebbe. So he was the first one. His name was Shneir Zalman of Liadi. He founded Lubavitch Hasidut, and he wrote his very important theological work, the Tanya, which is still studied today as kind of the foundational spiritual text of Lubavitch Hasidism, and there are now editions of the Tanya translated into English and with commentaries. Okay, so we're going to read a passage from the Tanya, written by Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, also known as the Alter Rebbe, also known as the first Lubavitcher Rebbe. Okay, just to locate where we are and what we're doing. All right, now I'm going to share. And the first Lubavitcher Rebbe was an incredibly deep thinker, and this is a version in English of part of his writings. Okay, the Theology of Shneir, I'm reading. Theology of Shneir Zalman of Liadi, the Alter Rebbe of Lubavitch Hasidim, maintains that, here's where we start to get theological. Nothing exists but God. The only reality of the universe is God. It's the only thing that exists. In English, we call this acosmism, meaning the cosmos does not actually exist in the same way that we think it exists. God is not only the basis of reality, God is the only reality. God is all there is. Creation is continuously brought into being through the divine word. By the way, what's the line in the Siddur that we say every morning that sort of corresponds to creation is continuously brought into being. HaMechadesh b'tuvo b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reshit. Right? God who renews creation every single day. We say that near the end of the first bracha, the first blessing of the Shema service. So it's not just so for he's also called, by the way, the Baal HaTanya, the author of the Tanya, another name. So for the Baal HaTanya, it's not just that God recreates creation anew every day, every morning the sun rises, it reminds us of it, but rather every second. Okay, God is creating the apparent world that we live in. It's only apparent. If our eyes could truly see reality, we would not see the material world, but instead behold God's continuous, here's where we get into, I don't know, everyone has their line of what's mumbo jumbo, okay? I apologize, this is my line, but you may disagree with me. You may say this is deeply meaningful, okay? Instead, behold God's continuous utterance of the Hebrew letters, the real matrix of all being. And we've talked about this before, this idea going back to the Zohar and before the Zohar, that the Hebrew letters are kind of like the elements of the universe, kind of corresponds to our scientific idea of elements, the individual building blocks of the universe. Okay. In such a radical monism means everything is one. The Shema, the declaration of God's unity, means effectively that nothing exists besides God. In Lubavitch writings, by the way, they'll talk about how things appear mitzido and mitzidenu, from God's vantage point and from our vantage point. Our vantage point is our human illusion of what the universe really is. It's not an illusion like in the movie The Matrix, exactly, okay, that someone, is creating for us to trick us. It's an illusion based on our limited perceptual apparatus. And if I were able to understand deeper beyond my limited perceptual apparatus, I would understand that God is everything. Now, this is a step beyond what we talked about a few weeks ago of Lurianic Kabbalah, the Kabbalah of the Ari, right? Where he said there's a divine spark in everything, panentheism. Lubavitch goes a step further, the Baal HaTanya, deeper that, and says actually everything is God. Right? Here's the English line, Bashamayim mima'al ve'al ha'aretz mitachat ein od. The last line of the first paragraph of the Aleinu. Heavens above and in the earth below, there is nothing else other than God. This means that even the material earth, which appears to the eyes of all to be actually existing, is naught and complete nothingness in relation to the Holy One of Being. By the way, for those who are not live but on the listening to the podcast and looking at the text, I didn't start at the beginning of my text today. I jumped to the last text, which is numbered page 56 and then page 57. Okay.
Can I get a question in here?
Can you pause for a moment? Let's read a little bit more. Okay.
Yes.
The unity of God does not mean that there are no other gods. That would be an easy one, right? Einod means there are no other gods. That's what we thought the last line of the Aleinu means. No, says the Baal HaTanya. It means that there is nothing apart from God. There is no existence whatsoever apart from God's existence. The whole creation is nullified within God as the rays of the sun within the orb of the sun. There's no such thing as a ray of the sun. It's the sun. Okay? This is the meaning of, I just want a couple of technical terms. I promise Carl will get to your question. Yichuda ila'a, the higher unity. Higher unity means that you grasp the fundamental the fundamental unity of the universe, which is that everything is God. Again, not Maimonides, which is God is outside the universe. Not even the Ari, which says there are aspects of God in everything in the universe. But God is the universe. So the obvious question, how do we reconcile the apparent contradiction between this cosmic vision and the inescapable experience of an obviously material world, meaning our day-to-day doesn't look to me like everything is God. It looks like that's my cup of coffee. Anyone can have a vision of the unity of all creation. It could be in a forest or by the shore of the sea. That would be your Hitbodedut experience, okay? And many of us have had tastes of this, right here. During the concluding service of Yom Kippur, the Elah, or the birth of a child, there are moments where we naturally, I will say, without working at it, we naturally can get glimpses of the unity and divinity of all creation. The question is, how do we bring the awareness of that higher unity into the everyday of this world? Always the question, right? For Hasidism, they talk a lot about, like, no one has to work at this at Kol Nidre. How do you bring not Kol Nidre, Ne'ilah? How do you bring Ne'ilah consciousness into your everyday life? Or the wonder of a child being born, or the feeling you get when you saw the sunset from a mountaintop, or you looked up at the Milky Way out in the country where you can see it and you got, vertigo. I get vertigo when I look up at the Milky Way. It's like, makes me, okay? So how do you bring that awareness into your quotidian, ordinary, boring, material life? That is the challenge of sacred living, to realize more unity with patience and devotion to make this world resemble the one on high. I would really change that line to recognize that this world is a reflection of, is not exactly where. And this is where Judaism parts company with the religions of the East. Judaism understands this yearning as a sacred obligation. Skip. Okay. This is the problem that the Baal HaTanya, the author of the Tanya, teaches is solved with the second line of the Shema, which is a line added, not taken from Deuteronomy. He suggests that reciting this phrase is actually our attempt to bring the supernal unity, which means the high-level view of the unity of everything of the universe as being an aspect of God. We have that consciousness from Shema Yisrael, Hashem Eloheinu, Hashem Echad. So Hashem Echad doesn't mean here there's one God as opposed to many gods, but there is a oneness to everything in the universe, and that is God. So how do we bring it back into this world? Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Blessed be the name, the presence of its dominion is ubiquitous and eternal. All right, big words. What we now understand is that the statement in the Zohar, I'm on the last page of the handout, that the verse Shema Yisrael, the first line, is Yichuda Ila'a, upper unity. In other words, we're making a statement about the actual nature of the universe. Hashem Eloheinu, Hashem Echad. Hey, listen, Jews, Shema Yisrael, our deity, who we worship, or the one that we consider to be our deity, is Adoshem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the ground of being, the beingness of the universe, and Hashem Echad. And that's all there is. That is Yichuda Ila'a. That is the higher unity, if we can grasp that. But we try to say it in the first line of the Shema. Baruch Shem Kivod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed is sort of a response to that, saying, okay, so we try to bring or grasp God's malchut, God's rulership, in the world as it is. And this is called Yichuda Tata'a, the lower unity. Most of the time, we don't grasp upper unity, because, most of us aren't all day long professional mystics, right? But we can say, okay, in the Shema, all right, there's this upper unity, and we're able to perceive it, Baruch Shem Kvod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed, by kind of trying to grasp it in our quotidian, mundane existence. Last paragraph here. So the Echad of the Shema is Yichuda Ila'a, higher unity, seemingly unattainable in this world. We're just sort of talking about what really is, which is hard for us to grasp because we live in the material world. and it is only a dim memory of a sacred moment. But the Va'ed, and of course, as you can imagine, we're coming up in a couple of weeks to the giving of the Torah at Sinai. As you can imagine, there are all kinds of commentaries that say, like, oh, that was a moment where all of Israel standing at Sinai was vouchsafed a glimpse of that upper unity, Sinai moment. We'll add that Sinai moment to Ne'ilah moment and birth of a child moment and sunrise moment and Milky Way moment and whatever moments you might have had in life. Okay? But all we get is a dim memory. The Va'ed of Baruch Shem Kvod Malchuto Le'olam, Va'ed all the time. Again, Va'ed, which means forever, but it means all the time. Okay? And I want to remind you, back 4 years ago, we said that one of the meanings of the word Baruch is flowing, like a brecha, a pool. Okay? So that God consciousness, that God existence flows, in fact, into everything. Le'olam va'ed. All the world. And us saying that is the quote-unquote lower unity, Yichuda Tata'a, and where we bring the oneness of the Holy One into our daily lives. I'm going to pause and then get to Carl's question. Okay? So by the way, this is a very radical idea, and the Lubavitch Hasidim are known for this radical idea. Not all Hasidim would agree with this, but they take the idea of Lurianic Kabbalah of panentheism, that there's God in everything, divinity in everything. They take this further in a radical way and say, actually, I'm going to say it a little differently in my own language. The fabric of the universe is God, and we do not realize that. And we try to have moments where we realize that, okay? Which also means, by the way, has all sorts of moral implications, right? Me punching you in the nose, or whatever the national version of that, me punching you in the nose is as foolish as my left arm punching my right arm, right? It would be as if my left arm thought my right arm wasn't me. Like babies, we think, there's a point where before they realize that their limbs are part of them, and then they realize, they master that their limbs are part of them. We're all kind of, familiar with some version of that idea, right? So we live in illusion to think that everything is separate, we're all separate, but in fact, underlying it, there is a fundamental unity that is hard, yes, that is hard for us to grasp. And so we may have some natural moments in life, or we may work on creating moments in life, such as saying the Shema, where we try to grasp that. Now, to those who say, oh, this is a new idea, this is a radical idea, I'd like to point out we also say every morning, Kadosh, 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 Hashem Tzvaot, Melo Chol Haaretz Kivodo. The entire universe is filled with God's glory, right? That's from Isaiah's vision of God on the throne in Isaiah chapter 6, which is going to be the Haftarah of Parshat Yitro in 3 weeks. I know that because that was my Parsha, right? In which Isaiah sees, again, his image, God sitting on a throne, and God's, the hem of God's robe fills the entire throne room. And this is implicitly understood to be as a metaphor for what the angels, God's attendants, then say in this vision. Okay, they say, what are the courtiers saying? Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. God is holy. God is fundamentally in some unique category different than anything else in the universe. Melo chol haaretz kvodo. God fills the entire universe. So I think the Baal HaTanya would say, I'm just telling you what that line from the prophet Isaiah, to about 700 BCE, okay, 2,700 years ago, that's just what that line means. I'm just explaining that to you, okay? I didn't make that up. I'm just telling you what that actually means. What that actually means is God fills the entire universe. Remember, by the way, also, Lurianic Kabbalah started with the place that originally God filled the entire universe, and so God had to pull back and do tzimtzum. God had to smallify oneself, God's self, a little bit, so that there's room for the universe to be created. So Lubavitch Hasidim says, no, not quite. God fills the whole universe, and everything is, again, I know that this is like now theologic gobbledygook, sort of coextensive with God. We just don't realize that. Now I will pause for Carl's question.
Well, actually, my question has evolved as you went
Good.
further.
Oh, good.
I have a now more maybe significant question.
Yeah.
My original one was about the Ein Od,
Yeah.
and the traditional interpretation that
Yeah.
means there's no other gods as opposed to there's nothing else.
Yes.
But I'll just let that one go for now.
I mean, I'll pause for a moment. I just want to say, I mean, just to say the clear thing, words have different interpretations. There may have been what the author meant, and there might be what a later generation interprets it to mean. And sometimes that means the later generation says, oh, that's really what the author meant. Or, if we're more modern literary poetic, we would say, well, that might not be what the author meant, but the author puts it out there. And then just like any poem or work of art, it's open to interpretation. But go ahead.
All right.
Yep.
Suppose I grant the Hasidim that the entire universe is God.
Yep.
It's not everything we need to know. It's not the total answer to how to live.
Mm-hmm.
Because our clear experience is that all encompassing godliness
Yes.
is somehow differentiated itself into different manifestations or
Yes.
forms.
Mm-hmm.
People, and there's
Mhm.
monkeys, and there's mountains, and
Yep.
there's stars, and
Yep.
all this different stuff.
Yep.
We have to figure out how the differentiated pieces should relate to each other.
Yes.
No, I shouldn't punch my neighbor in the face, maybe, but we need a different principle in that somehow we're all part of the same giant cosmic thing to help us figure out how the pieces should interact with each other.
Right. So the traditional Jewish answer would be mitzvot. So the first
Yeah, we have lots of answers, but they don't flow from this postulate.
Well, so
I'm sure he wrote lots of other stuff too to talk about how people should behave. So
so the theological answer is that step one is to try to realize this. The Hasidim were not anomian. They did not believe in not law. So they would say, and we have a system of practice to try to help put this into practice. And now I'm going to talk tachlis. Okay. Practicality. And because the manifestations of the world that we grasp are very manifold and complex, you started to list them, because they're so manifold and complex, sometimes we may not be certain what is the best way to live in this unity. I'll just give a obvious kind of, dumb one today. Okay. Is it better to drill, baby, drill so that we have oil so that people can have inexpensive heat and light in their homes? Or is it better to recognize in a long-range way that if we do that, we're going to ruin the earth that we live on for future generations? Like, which is right and which is wrong? So the fact that there's a system of behavior doesn't necessarily mean that it's always obvious or easy to know what to do in a system of behavior because of those manifold complexities that you listed. I guess that would be my initial response. The manifest complexity of the world make it confusing to us to sometimes know how to proceed. It doesn't mean that we're not supposed to try to figure out how to proceed. And it doesn't mean there isn't a way to proceed. It's just hard for us to figure out what the way is to proceed.
Thank you. I'm sure this is a lengthy work, and we only touched a bit of it.
Yep. Yes. By the way, the Tany's a really, really big book. The reason I brought this is, again, this idea. I want to take it back to God. Okay. The idea that it's a radical idea. Everything is God. By the way, I have a book, popular book by a guy named Rabbi J. Michelson, which is called Everything is God. And he says the whole point of that idea, which he talks about Judaism, but also other religions. He's a meditator. He's one of these guys who was a meditator first and then became a rabbi. But this idea, his basic idea, he takes it further, says that all dualisms are wrong, meaning the body versus the soul, or good versus evil. All dualisms are mistaken. They are cognitive errors. Now, we can talk about this. What about evil? What about when people do bad things? So, yeah, there's a lot to say about that. But the fundamental idea is a monism. Everything is one. You can say some big words. Monism, everything is one. Acosmism, which means there is no cosmos. Cosmos means the orderly array of different things, the monkeys and the trees and everything that Carl said, right? That is, it's not a lie like The Matrix. If you saw those movies, it's not a lie. It's not fake. It's superficial. And there is more beyond the superficial. So, and that it is a goal of regular folks like you and me who are not professional theologians, but the simple Hasid peasant who goes out to the woods for moments of hitbodedut to be with God, or who comes to shul and says the Shema or says Kadosh, 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 is the goal of the regular Jew to try to grasp that and feel that and believe that. So we have some from another book. I'm going back to the beginning of the handout now. Your Word is Fire, which is a compilation of certain texts from various Hasidic masters, not the Baal HaTanya, other people, and the Baal HaTanya, about prayer, Hasidic prayer. So saying this in sort of simpler words, more folksy terms. A person of spirit may begin to pray in awe and trembling, saying, "Who am I, a poor clod of earth, to stand before the King of Kings in prayer?" This person speaks only a partial truth. He does not yet know the higher truth, however, which the Baal HaTanya would refer to as the Yehuda Ila'a. What's the word Yehuda? Sorry. Anyone remember what was the word? I'm having trouble scrolling down. Yeah, it was Yehuda Ila'a, right? So, oops, wait. Oh, sorry. Are you back? Oh, hold on. I lost the window. I'm sorry. I'm going to get it back in a second. I pressed a button, right? So you think that because you don't grasp the Yehuda. So you start out your davening thinking, who am I? What do I have to do with God? But that's because you don't grasp the Yehuda Ila'a. Speaks only a partial truth. He does not yet know the higher truth, however. That would be the Yehuda Ila'a. The truth that all things, even the material world, are filled with God's presence. Okay? This is not from Lubavitch Hasidim. Okay? So it doesn't say coextensive with God's presence. It just says filled with God's presence. You could say that's Lurianic idea. Okay? Thus Scripture says, God is in heaven, you are upon the earth, do not rush to speak. But as long as you believe that God is only in heaven, as long as you believe that, and that God does not fill the earth, then let your words be few. Only when you come to know that you too contain God's presence, only then can you begin to pray. I don't think that is prescriptive, meaning you shouldn't pray unless you realize that you contain God's presence. I think it means you are supposed to try to grasp that you contain God's presence. Another passage, second page. Be joy, a little bit different. Be joyful. This is from the Baal Shem Tov, attributed to the Baal Shem Tov. Be joyful always. Know that God's presence is with you. that you are looking directly at your creator and their creator at you. A little bit different, okay? But God's, next to last line, God's flowing life is everywhere. So we see that Hasidim, different ones, are wrestling with this idea. What does it mean that God is omnipresent? Does it mean that you can find God in everything? The Ari would agree with that. Okay, Rabbi Isaac Luria. There's the spark of godliness in everything. Remember his theory, divine light. It was poured into the vessels. The vessels couldn't handle it. The vessels broke. They're little smidgens, blobs like mercury of divine light everywhere. They're covered by husks, klipot. It's our job to open up those husks to find the divine light in everything, to connect that divine light back to its source. That's for Rabbi Isaac Luria, 1600s. The first Hasidic Rebbe says, it's not even that. It's further than that. Okay? It's not just that there's God in everything, but everything is God. There are no husks, as it were. I don't know if he actually said there are no husks. I may be misquoting. Sometimes, third passage, sometimes while at prayer, you may feel that you cannot enter the upper world at all, meaning I'm just in shul and I don't understand any of this stuff. I don't feel it. Your mind remains below, here, and you think the whole earth is full of his glory. I'm in the aretz. Melochol haaretz. I'm down here in the earth. But really you are nearer to God than you know. At such times you are like a child who has just begun to understand how close to God she or he is. Even though your mind cannot yet transcend this world, right? So there's a recognition, this is also from the Baal Shem Tov, there is a recognition that it's hard to have this consciousness. It's not necessarily what comes to you at first thought without any effort. Even though it's supposed to be your starting point, it's not easy to make it your starting point. So you may not realize this yet, even though it's the reality. See if there's anything else. Oh, that's it. Okay. That's what I wanted to bring. So I'm gonna unshare. I'm gonna stop sharing. Okay. It's a lot. That's a lot. And by the way, and the Hasidim know that, you go to shul and you're worried about going to work and you're going to have an argument with someone and your car had a breakdown. They're aware that people are aware of their daily worries, and they do talk about, and we'll try to get to some passages, either actually different approaches, how to leave behind your daily worries to try to think this and experience this. I actually studied a text with someone, I'll try to bring it, and probably we'll get to it in a couple of months, about how you can actually use your daily worries to try to connect you to this rather than leave them behind. By the way, some of the Hasidic masters call these things, the Baal Shem Tov has a long treatise on prayer where he talks about machshavot zarot, external thoughts. And these are metaphorized as like the king sets up guards outside. There are layers of guards to prevent people from getting to the king. Okay. And you have to get through those machshavot zarot, those external thoughts. We would call them distractions. Okay. By the way, like a lot of the Kabbalistic people, some of the Hasidim are hung up on sex. Okay. So for some of them, machshavot zarot, external thoughts, means sex thoughts, which are distracting you from holiness, in air quotes. Okay. But let's just make it broader and say distractions. So some of them say you got to sweep away distractions. Baal Shem Tov also says how can you use those distractions instead of having it be a little bit like a closed door blocking your path, right? This is the path. How can you get that door open? How can you actually use that distraction as a vehicle in your prayer, right? And some Hasidim say, how can you actually on purpose take your worries and use them as a vehicle to prayer? Right? So there is an awareness that in regular daily life, it's hard to just have your mind and heart go right to, yes, I feel the unity of everything in the universe that I am part of, right? Even though that's supposed to be your starting point, right? Because that's, let's say, Chabad's, Lubavitch's version of Dveikut, which we talked about last week, how you cleave to God. You cleave to God. Why? Because God is the ground of everything. You're supposed to recognize that. Even though that's supposed to be the starting point, there's a recognition, practically speaking, that it's hard for us to do that. And so there are various techniques. I promise we will get to that in some weeks ahead about kind of how you get to that starting point, given that for most of us, our starting point is worrying about, I'm going to have to pick up my car and how much is it going to cost. So we're going to be continuing with Hasidism for about the next 2 months or so, because they thought very deeply and profoundly about these ideas, about what it means to experience the presence of God, and that's why it's very relevant to prayer. So we'll stop here. Have a good day. Stay healthy. Chodesh Tov. Repeating again that we will not be meeting next Tuesday. We will resume, God willing, in 2 Tuesdays.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.